Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this webinar for Public Education Week. My name is Nahliah Webber. I'm the Executive Director of the Orleans Public Education Network, where we work with community to keep them engaged and informed about what's happening in education policy and public policy generally, so that they can advocate, navigate in these systems, and have the information that they need to ensure that not just their children, but also other children in the school system have access to high quality public schools that are delivered in an equitable and just way. And for Public Education Week, we're gonna have a series of webinars, and I am pleased that we are being joined by Arianne, Craig, and I'm just really excited about what you have to say. It's so important that parents and teachers and educators have this information about how to best foster the kinds of relationships that we need to make sure that children are successful. So I'd like to welcome Arianne Craig Jolla, and she's going to introduce herself, and then we're going to get started.
Hey, thank you so much, Nahliah. I definitely appreciate you having me join you all. Thanks to Open. You all are doing some fantastic things here in the city of New Orleans and abroad. So I do want to thank you for allowing me to come on and just have a conversation. So I'm looking forward to that. I am Arianne Craig Jolla, as Nahliah said, and I'm looking forward to just sharing with you, my parents, other educators, everybody who's involved in this Public Education Week. This is a big deal.
Right, great, wonderful. So let's get started. So first of all, you are a published author.
I am.
You took all of your experience and you created a wonderful resource for parents called Teach Your Own Kids. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about that book, since it's what's going to be guiding our discussion today.
Sure thing. So I've been teaching now for about 18 years. I started in 2000 as a substitute long-term sub here in New Orleans East, and but I wanted to teach since I was in about the 4th grade. And so I went to Dillard, got my undergrad in elementary and special ed, and then I went to UNO and got a master's in special ed, and walked through the doors of the classroom and hated it. Oh, did I hate it?
I think a lot of people can relate.
I'm sure a lot of people can relate. And it was never, for me, it was never, ever, ever the kids. It was always the way that the system was set up. So I decided I'm going to fast forward as much as possible. I decided that I was going to start. I taught for about 5 years in the school system, both in Orleans as well as in St. Tammany Parish. And when Katrina hit, I was in St. Tammany Parish and decided that it just was not working for me. Didn't matter what parish I was in. There were just some things that I was not able to do. For instance, pay close attention to my kids and give them exactly what I felt like they needed. Those basic fundamental skills that were not necessarily being directly tested through the standardized testing. So I found that it was frustrating for me as a teacher. And instead of complaining about the things that I saw, lack of parent involvement, apathetic school communities, I decided that I wanted to start the conversation, to have a conversation about the importance of the school community and the families that we serve. And yes, I did say serve, because we serve the families. So I wanted to figure out how to bridge the gap between these two vital entities, with that child being in the middle of the family and the school community. So I decided that one of the best ways that I would be able to do that would be through my writing. So Teach Your Own Kids, Schools Can't Do It Alone, is the book that I wrote and released in 2017. And it is an attempt to start the conversation between school communities and the families that we serve.
Wonderful, wonderful. So let's get into that experience. And shout out for being 18 years in the game.
Yeah, thank you.
That's almost a generation, and that's really powerful. So thank you for your continued and ongoing service through all the ups and downs of it. So the structure of this conversation, we talked a little bit in advance about the kinds of things that we, want families and educators to take away from this webinar. And what you often said in that conversation was that it's a partnership, like a marriage. Let's dive into that, and then let's talk about how we're going to navigate this marriage. So what do you mean by that?
Well, I've been teaching for 18 years and I've been married. It'll be 20 years in May. So about 19 and a half years I've been married. I got married my junior year in college, right before I started teaching. And so that relationship that I have with my husband reminds me a lot of what it takes to truly, truly be there to with the kids that I work with and their families. So as a teacher, that relationship between myself and my family is just as important as my relationship with my husband. And that means that there are certain things that have to happen in order for that relationship to remain healthy. We have to know one another. We have to get to know one another. We have to communicate. We have to give one another space to be human. So there are certain things that go along with that. And that's why those relationships are easily paralleled for me, because that committed relationship should not stop just if it's not a husband and wife, but it should actually carry over into all of those facets of our lives that are important. And the school community and the families that we serve, that's an extremely important partnership connection.
Okay. So the partnership relationship is what we're focused on. So it's not an us or them, but it's a we together. We're all in this together. So the school has very clear responsibilities in terms of what they're supposed to do for their child's education. And parents know and are leading their set of responsibilities for the child. But sometimes in communicating between those two groups, the communication can be fraught with tension or misunderstanding. Things can fall through the crack, or the communication may not even happen at all. In which that puts a child or a child's educational experience kind of in jeopardy. So we have to be proactive about that. So first, let's talk about that parent communication piece, because that's one of the things that you talk about in the book as a central and key component of developing this relationship so that your child can be successful in the school during the school year. So talk to us about that parent communication with the staff. What should we know about that?
Well, it is the starting point. It is the foundation, the fundamental aspect of the relationship, the partnership, is communication. Mm-hmm. We have to have open dialogue with one another. And oftentimes in the past, it has been, as you mentioned, an us versus them, or an us and them type of dynamic. But communication brings us to the same playing field. We're both starting in the same location. So communication has to begin prior to me even deciding that this is the school that my child is going to attend. Prior to that, I'm already reaching out. I'm already trying to get to know the culture of the school. I want to know the culture of the school leaders to make sure that this is the place that my child, my individual child, who's not like anybody else, is going to do well in this location. So when it comes to even prior to that child being placed in the school, it's important that we begin the communication process and setting expectations. So whether it relates to what teachers expect, what the school leaders expect, or what the parent expects, when we come together and say, this is what I expect, this is what my child, these are the challenges that we've had in the past, those things are critical to and should be open for discussion very early on. And that is something that I find lacks on both ends, whether it's on the school community side or on our parents. Sometimes we just don't have the language to facilitate the kind of conversation that's going to be conducive to making sure that the child gets what he needs in that school environment.
Right. You mentioned something about parents talking to teachers, administrators in advance about the child, and you mentioned the child's challenges. Um, Sometimes it is difficult for a parent to, want to probably bring up some of those things, especially in this landscape. It is the case that often children move from school to school,
Yeah.
and it may be, parents. Children may come to the conclusion that the child was probably having challenges because of that school.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I switch my child to a new school, those challenges should not resurface.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to that in terms of how parents should talk about challenges, how they should make the school aware of all of who the child is and what they may be coming to the school interaction with?
Yeah, that's a critical question. Critical question. And part of beginning the communication process early on, it builds trust. And so it's very difficult for a parent to come into a school, to meet with new school leaders and teachers and divulge information that sometimes is very sensitive information, because oftentimes our kids are a reflection of our efforts in the minds of our parents. Our kids are a reflection of me. My kid is a reflection of my effort. Am I a bad parent if my child gets suspended? So there are a lot of things that go into helping a parent to feel comfortable enough to divulge sensitive information. So once again, starting with that communication piece and building the trust with that school community.
Mhm.
And then once that trust is built, it is critical that parents are open to disclosing information that is going to be that could steer and help us and empower us, because I look at that disclosure as empowering. And when I say empower us, for instance, I'll give you an example. We have in the past, we partnered with our school. We partnered with the an organization, a city organization, to provide summer programming for kids across the city. And oftentimes, and we were working with about 100 kids at a time. And because it was only a 6 to 8 week program, sometimes parents did not find it important to divulge information such as, he tends to kind of have temper tantrums when this happens, or he doesn't do very well when the schedule changes, or she kind of has trouble maybe playing with other kids. This kind of information, if we had been privy to it, if we had been privy to the information, then we would have been able to approach that child on an individual basis, instead of maybe expecting this child to do what everybody else is expected to do. We could have set different expectations for this child based on what the family has chosen to disclose to us. Mm-hmm. So it is critical because it saves us time. It saves us the headache of sometimes kids getting put out of class for something that could have been completely avoided. So it is something that is critical for parents, but I do understand that it takes trust. Mm-hmm. And as teachers, we've got to take that information from the parents and say, okay, I will not treat your child differently. I will not use this information against your child. I will use this information to undergird the process, to make sure that we are aware of what's going on with your child, whether it is you all, you all have a recent divorce in the family, or there's a social or family issue that has taken place, then we can use that information to support the family, to support the child, and not to isolate them. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we do have that responsibility as a school community as well.
Yes. And you ended up answering two of the follow-up questions that I had. One was more of an observation. I think it's what you said is spot on. It's really important that should be treated as information and data about the child, and not a judgment of the child, who they are as a person and who their parents are, who their family unit is. So the behavior is just data. This is how my child responds to certain things. This has been his response in the past. This is what he is likely to do if this happens. So incorporate that into your dealings with my child and potentially
Absolutely.
how you structure his or her learning experiences. So that's really critical. The behavior is not in any way a reflection of the child's worth or,
Absolutely.
you know, and the children should be respected as who they are as individuals and be accommodated as much as possible. And my question was going to be, how do schools foster that trust, right? Because I think often when you're walking into these situations, like, all right, here I am, a parent of a child or two or three in the school, and there's this school, right? School can seem, or an institution can seem very
Yeah.
intimidating. It
Yeah.
can seem like it has all of the power and the authority. And if you're not walking in with the sense that we're on a level playing field, like how you mentioned earlier, sometimes those feelings about, the power dynamics or the authority dynamics can translate into sometimes parents shrinking away.
Yeah.
What can schools do really to develop that trust so that parents can feel like, okay, I can come here, share information about my child that's not going to be used against him or her, but is actually going to be used to support her. So how can schools foster that kind of environment?
There are several ways, and that's a really good question. There are several ways that schools can foster a culture, right? A culture that supports parent engagement. Because when parents are engaged, when they are invited to be engaged and they are supported in that engagement, then parents tend to feel more apt and more open to share in that safe space. So the entire culture of the school, from training the school staff to acknowledge parents, it can be as simple as acknowledging a parent, never being too busy to have a conversation with a parent or to say, you know what, I got the kids with me right now, but let's talk. I got some time at this point. Because when we acknowledge that our parents are critical, that they are vital to the operation of the school, then we make the parents feel comfortable sharing some things that they may not feel comfortable sharing otherwise. So it starts with training the staff to acknowledge the importance of the parents that are on campus whenever they are on campus. That's from parent orientation to registration to walking the halls, acknowledging the importance of the parent in the building, as well as and creating a culture that says that parent input is welcome here. Because sometimes, as the experts, the professionals, we push parents out without realizing it, because we give off the perception that we are the only professionals in the room. And we don't necessarily do it we don't necessarily do it on purpose, but sometimes, especially if a parent has been out of school for a long time, I'm not really sure how to navigate this whole school process, then what we have to do as a school community is to recognize the intimidation factor, that thing that's there, but sometimes we don't talk about it. We have to intentionally recognize that and then do everything that we can to break down that wall. And that is with acknowledgement. That's with making sure that when the parent comes in and provides input, that input is valued. And then, of course, I would also suggest providing a safe space for parents to have input with one another, without the input from any school leaders, but providing a safe space where parents can just get together and have a discussion about what the things that are affecting them in the school.
Right. Absolutely. And that just made me think about when you're talking about safe spaces for parents within the school,
Absolutely.
to come together, discuss what concerns them, and potentially be solution oriented. When thinking about, unfortunately, the lack of parent teacher organizations, PTAs, PTOs that exist in our public schools, across the city. Every summer, we usually have an intern kind of like find out, like, who has a PTO or a PTA. And we did it a couple of summers in a row. We didn't do it this past summer, but every time we do it, the number is abysmally low.
Yeah.
right? Schools
Yeah.
not providing or creating intentional, organized, formal spaces within their buildings for parents to come together and develop a community that will support the school. So,
Absolutely.
you know, hopefully from watching this, this would put the fire into some people to say, you know, let's get some of our parents together and let's see how they can be organized in the building, because
Yeah.
that parent buy-in is really important.
Critical. It is vital
Right.
to
If
have the
you
parent
don't
buy.
have the parent buy-in, I mean, you know the difference between a student that's not doing well and their parent has bought in, and a student that's not doing well and their parent hasn't bought in. Very
Absolutely.
different experience.
Very different. Very different. You're going to see some progress with that student who's not doing so well, but the parent is there.
Yeah.
There's no way to go but up for that student.
Right.
But for a student whose parent is not involved, then we've got a major issue. We've got to figure out how to help that child.
Right, absolutely. So after you know, parents and school leaders and teachers start that line of communication and they're actively using it, we talked about how both sides should know what the expectations are, and that should be a big part of their communication, especially in the beginning. How do we do that? How do we set those expectations between the school and the family?
Yeah, that it all goes back to communication.
Mm-hmm.
It really all goes back to communication, even in the marriage partnership that we spoke about at the very beginning. There's some things that you have in your head that you expect to happen, and when they don't happen,
Yeah.
we have a tendency to become disappointed.
Yeah.
Right? There's no difference between that and the partnership between the school community and the families. If we don't voice exactly what we expect from one another, and it could be as simple as I, as a teacher, hey mom, hey dad, I give homework every day, including weekends. So if he comes home and says he doesn't have homework, you already know, I've said it ahead of time, this is what I expect of your child. So if I make that expectation clear, or if I say, well, I am best reached via text, or I am best reached via phone call, then I already set the expectation that if you reach out to me via text, or if you reach out to me via phone, then that is the best way to reach me. So it's a matter of voicing exactly what we expect from one another. And if a parent says, well, I expect that when I send a note, I get a reply. Just that simple. And I'm looking for a reply within a certain amount of time. If I'm sending a note, it's because it's critical, it's important. Maybe there's no other way for me to get in touch with you because of my work schedule or what have you. But I'm just expecting something as simple as, please reply to my note, even if that says, I'll give you a call tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So, voicing exactly what we hope to receive out of this partnership, and then coming to terms with that, and deciding whether or not it's reasonable, right? If those expectations are reasonable. And if they're reasonable and we can agree on them, then we can move forward from there. And that way, if you don't meet my expectations that we've already discussed, if you're not meeting my expectations as a parent, if you're not meeting my expectations as a teacher, then we can come back to the table and say, well, this is what we discussed. So do we need to make an adjustment?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the main thing is, it may sound like a lot. It may sound like it's something that is monumental, but it's something as simple as a quick 10 to 15-minute phone call at the beginning of the school year and say, hey, can we have a quick conversation about X, Y, Z? Or it could be something as simple as a letter that says, hey, I'm so and so's mom. I'd like to, just get an idea of what you're looking for, what success looks like for you this year, so that I can make sure at home I'm aligned with what you're expecting in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be that simple.
That's wonderful. And for anyone who's listening, Arianne just provided great scripts for you to use. You can copy and paste. When I do this, I expect this. How can I be aligned with what you're doing at home? All of those are great ways to verbalize, or at least to start the conversation, and you can kind of input, your own set of expectations. Now, what about this? Because this sometimes happens too.
Okay.
Sometimes a parent's expectations may be higher than what they think the teacher's expectations are. So, for example, that parent that wants to see homework every day,
okay,
and their child is in a classroom with a teacher that does not provide homework every day. How do you have that conversation?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. And that happens. That happens. And I think it's a beautiful thing when that happens, because the parent is saying, hey, okay, not that your expectations are too low, but they are different. How can we meet in the middle? Right. So on both ends, I believe that my teacher in that situation has to be open to providing other options for this parent. So as a teacher, it's just like having a child in your classroom that is maybe moving a little bit quicker than the pace of the class. We don't just allow that child to sit on the sidelines and wait for the rest of us, right? So it's the same concept. That what am I going to do? I'm going to individualize the instruction. I'm going to specifically consider this child who moves a little bit quicker than the rest of the class. Whenever I am planning, whenever I am deciding what is going to happen in the classroom environment, I've got to provide additional opportunities for this child who seems to move quicker. Right. Otherwise, we're going to have issues, maybe behavioral, maybe stagnation. So we have to make sure that we address those extremes in our classroom. It's the same concept. If a parent says, my baby doesn't have enough in the evenings, I am looking for some additional opportunities. We have a goal in mind, and what's happening now is not going to help us to reach that goal. So the parent now has taken that to the teacher, and the teacher also provides those other resources and says, okay, well, these are some other things that I think that Jason can do, that Nahliah can do to assist at home with the goals that we've set. Because remember, we've already talked about expectations. We're setting goals, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about that. But to be aligned, so the teacher has to be flexible, and the parent has to also say, okay, I understand that this is not something that I can necessarily send to you to check or to add to the grade book or anything like that. But if you say this is a good resource, then this is something that I'm going to use in the evenings with my child.
Right. Thank you for that. And I'm going to provide another example. It could be its own other webinar.
Yeah.
But I know this comes up for parents. When your expectations don't align with the culture of the school, where you may have, and the expectations may be around appropriate practices according to like child development, ages and stages. So I know, for example, if I had a child in the school, I'd be like, I don't care what happened, we don't do silent lunch.
Yeah, I got you.
Yes, I don't know what y'all gonna have to do at that school, but I better not have little Johnny coming home talking about he had to be silent at lunch. Like, it's not developmentally appropriate. So like I said, this could be a whole other webinar, how to set those expectations when the cultures are different. But if you can just, throw a couple of ideas out there for us to consider. What do you do when that happens? Because that happens. A lot of parents don't agree with the discipline code. They don't agree with withholding recess. They don't agree with things like not having a PE section of their child's day. That's bigger than, can I have it's not bigger, but it's different, and it requires a different set of nuances than, can my child have extra work? Basically what you're saying here is, are you going to change the culture of this school? Or make a modification for my child, which schools are, that's risky, right? That's a slippery slope. Like, if I make it an exception for your child, then 600 children in this building, we can't do that all the time. So just very quickly, what might you have to say to that?
Oh, that's What do we do when we want to change culture, period? We get together, we unify, and we do it from within, right? So if my parents have decided that this is something that is bothersome, or if one parent decides this is something that's bothersome, that parent hopefully has been involved in the school on some level. Not everybody can be involved on the same level. So maybe, but this parent has been involved on some level and is aware enough of the culture of the school, whether it is the silent lunch debacle or not having recess, that kind of a thing. Chances are, if one parent has an issue with it, there are several other parents that have the same issue. Now it is time to mobilize. It's time for parents to mobilize. That's why a safe space for the parents to be able to air grievances among one another in the school is healthy. Because as school leaders, we don't know everything. Right? And we have a different vantage point than the parents, but it's critical. It's vitally important that those parents who are having those issues get involved and figure out from within, how can we change the culture of the school? There's nothing wrong with saying, this is not working. This is not developmentally appropriate. Here are some solutions that we have, right? So coming together, unifying to change the culture with other parents, and then bringing to the table solutions that say, instead of this, how about this? Or we can support you in this way. Because the reality is, we have schools that are doing what they are allowed to do. Right? So many of our schools, we're doing what we're allowed to do. But if a parent, remember that squeaky wheel, if a parent comes in and then two more parents and three more, and then we've unified, then you won't be ignored.
Can't ignore that.
You can't be ignored. So it's about unifying, making a collective, deliberate effort, but bringing solutions to the table, not just coming in and saying, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, but being involved enough to say, we care about the culture of the school. We care about what our kids are exposed to, and these are the solutions that we bring to the table. How can we get this enforced? How can we take care of this?
Right. Wonderful. I like it. Thanks. So really, like, get involved, organize, mobilize, be solution oriented. So is parent organizing.
Absolutely.
And parent advocacy when there are cultural issues that need to be addressed.
Absolutely.
One of the things that you mentioned in terms of like what's guiding that communication, you need to have a goalpost, right? And so you mentioned before, teachers saying, this is what success looks like in my classroom, parents saying, this is what success looks like for my child's education. Talk to us about how you define success and then how you make success happen in the parent-school relationship.
Well, success is going to be based on the individual. And we know that at the center, we've mentioned the teachers, we've mentioned the parents, but we know who's at the center, the child, right? So in order for us to define success, that child has to be involved on some level, right? The data that we've gathered, whether the child is 5 years old or 15, the parent has enough data from dealing with the child for those 5 years or those 15 years to say, this is what my child is capable of. From what I have seen, this is what my child is capable of. So the parent brings that to the table. And then the teacher, as a professional, says, well, this is what I've seen in my X number of years of teaching. This is what success looks like to me. So in order to reach that agreement, we've got to make sure that the child remains the central focus, right? And bring it back to making sure that the child at the end, so whether it's and setting those goals, and just like we set 3-month goals and 9-month goals and 2-year goals, the school year is approximately 9 months long. So by Christmas, what do we expect? As a parent, as my child, what are you expecting? Do you is the honor roll in reach for you this year? What do you plan to have by the end of this first semester as far as your grades? I know algebra may have been a challenge for you last year. Now you're in algebra 2. So what do you anticipate? And then even with the teachers, by Christmas, this is what success looks like in my class. By the end of this first semester, they should have done X, Y, Z. And bringing those three minds together is how we define what success looks like for that one child, for that one family. And that's critical because it takes investment on the part of the teacher, because not only am I helping to define success for that one child, but every child in my room, I should be able to help to define success for that child as well. So it takes investment on the part of the parent. It takes investment on the part of the teacher and the school community as well. But once we set those goalposts and we say, this is what we're expecting by this time, then we'll know whether or not we've reached it when we get there. And we call those SMART goals, right? They're specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, realistic, right? The R for realistic, and then we have the T, time sensitive, so by Christmas, by Mardi Gras. And those are critical to making sure that our kids are getting what they need and that they are achieving success on the level that they are capable of.
Right. I love it. Thank you. And, we're talking about communication between the family and the school, but what you're highlighting also is that the child needs to be in these communication efforts as well. And so there needs to be more to get a sense of who the child is from the child's own perspective.
Yes.
Tell me about yourself. How would you define your behavior? I noticed that you're coming here from another school. Did you like that school? What did you did or not like? Who was your favorite teacher and why? And what are your academic goals for the year? What do you think your strengths are? How can we build on those? We often don't do enough to hear from the child how they understand themselves and what they want to get out of this experience. And so I thank you for, at least adding that component that the child needs to be central and also an active participant in designing this experience.
And I would even go to add on to that, to piggyback on that, is we also can define those social goals. So it doesn't just have to be an academic piece. It can be social. There are some of our kids who are getting put out of class constantly. They've gotten suspended at their old school several times. If there's a social goal that needs to be included, then including that social goal to say, okay, this normally by Halloween, he's gotten suspended at least once. Normally by Christmas, she's gotten into at least one fight. So our goal for this year is to help her to manage her behavior so that by Christmas, we have 0 suspensions or 0 altercations. And those are healthy goals as well. And then we just put the steps in place to help us to get to that goal.
Right. And being proactive about that goal setting, because what normally happens is an event occurs, probably more than once, it's repetitive. And now we want to sit down and create a behavior plan with the child. But this is after several occurrences of these unfortunate interactions. And we had perhaps maybe in the first week of school, had it not be about assessing you and benchmarking you, but while we're teaching you about the culture of the school, we're also doing these other kinds of things. Maybe we can be proactive and not have to wait for another intervention or process in December.
After the fact.
Right? After relationships have already been damaged and require repair. Maybe we can do it on the front end. So that's wonderful. So we have established lines of communication. We know what the expectations are. We've set some goals and we check in, and then there may be progress, but sometimes there isn't progress, or an event occurs that needs to be addressed. How do we have that conversation? Following up from the first 3 steps to either things are going well or what is going on? I'm not pleased.
just like you just did.
Right.
just like you just, it's just that simple.
Yeah.
It is just that simple. When we are in, whether it is, and I say, I likened it to a marriage. I compared it to a marriage. But what if you've had a relationship with your sister or your brother or your mom or your dad? What do we do in healthy relationships where there is a hiccup, where there is a problem, where there is an inevitable opportunity for miscommunication, right? Those of us that are interested in salvaging that relationship, those of us that are interested in protecting that relation, the sacredness of that healthy relationship, we are the ones that are going to say, hey, that's not working for me. Let's talk. We're the ones, parents, we're going to send a text to that teacher and say, hey, heard something. I don't want to jump to conclusions. Can we talk? Let me know when you're available. Or as a teacher, as a school leader, I'm going to call that mom and say, hey, mom, I think we got to iron out some things. Do you mind coming in to see me? Do you mind having a phone conference with me? I'm available at this time. Right? So using the language that's necessary to say, you are valuable to me. I'm not gonna shrug you off. I'm not gonna pretend that we're not having this issue, right? But we are going to meet it head on, and we're going to work together to fix it. That's what partners do. We work together to fix those areas that need to be fixed, and they are going to happen.
Yeah.
It's inevitable. There is no perfect relationship. And so that's why getting to know that teacher in the beginning, the teacher investing in that parent in the beginning, and knowing if, okay, Jason said his mom said such and such, but I just talked to his mom a couple of days ago and I don't think so. So let me give her a call or let me shoot a text and say, hey, let's talk about this because we're going off the tracks, right? So it's just that simple, verbalizing it.
Right. Especially where, I've been in the classroom, I've been a teacher, I've worked with kids in a variety of settings, and often the child is an important communicator between the parties, an interlocutor, if you will, right? Yes. So sometimes, and I've also been a student, being parented by a parent who didn't play no games. So sometimes I wanted to be strategic and heading off, whatever the teacher
problem,
right? Whatever the teacher was going to tell my mom, I probably wanted to get to her first and give her my side of the story first.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So in recognizing that, children are a communicator between school and home. It's not always directly between the teacher and the parent. And, children, they are smart. They are crafty. They are strategic.
They are.
Right. And then they have an incentive to communicate messages in a particular type of way.
Oh, yes.
Can contribute to a breakdown in communication between the parent and the teacher. How do we navigate that?
We stop that in its tracks, right? That's what we do. We stop that in its tracks and not to silence the child,
right?
Because it is important that the child be the go-between. Right? The child is the constant between school and home,
right?
That child. So there are messages that need to go home through that child, right? About the culture of the school, about the culture of the classroom that helps the parent to make adjustments. If the child comes home and says, it's hard for me to study or it's hard for me to learn because there's constantly somebody getting into trouble. Okay, those are the kinds of things we need our kids to come home and say, right? But know your child. You know your child.
Be honest about who your child is. You know who your child is. Be honest.
Yes, And sometimes, our parents will come in and they'll say, I just can't believe. And then the more you listen and let them talk, just talk. This is not the first time that your child has come home and told an untruth. if that's a word, right? And this is not the first time that your child has manipulated the situation to fit his needs or to fit her needs. So if we would be honest, we know our children. So take into account, right? That and sometimes even when we know them, they'll surprise us.
Yeah.
So take into account that this is a child. And the information that this child is bringing me is from a child's point of view. I need to get the other point of view. Whether I believe my child or not, I need to get the other side. Remember that, you know how it said that there are always three parts to three perspectives, right? Yours, mine, and what really happened. It's important that on both ends, if the child comes to the classroom and tells the teacher, well, my mama said, right? Teachers, we can't jump to conclusions and just assume that that is accurate, or that is the tone, or that was the intention, right? We have to be able to say, okay, well, I hear you, and I'm making a mental note, and now I'm going to go to the source and have a conversation. So that is important, is that we know our child, and that even when we know our child, still ask questions and go straight to the source to get those questions answered.
Right. I love it. And to, what you said earlier about, when there is tension or something happens that you don't want to happen, if you're invested in that relationship, if you value that relationship, you're going to approach that issue very differently than if you don't care about the relationship. And that goes on both sides, right? And so, we would want for folks to we would want people to be invested in the relationship so that they can extend grace.
Absolutely.
During those moments, which can be pretty tense. And, once a parent and a teacher decided that they don't get along, it's really the child that can, suffer as a result of those two adults' relationships. So being invested in extending grace, there are definitely times to be very clear about what your expectations are and let people know you're not playing any games. But also, coming in hot may not be the best thing. Getting hot may be justified.
Yeah.
Maybe coming in hot, whether it's the teacher or the parent, may not.
It doesn't benefit us at all. And think about how easy it is in our everyday lives, to say, oh, forget it. Right? To relationships, to people.
Yeah.
But that's not something, it's not an option for us when our child is involved. It's not an option for a parent to say, oh, just forget that teacher, because that teacher still has your child for the rest of the year. Right? And it's not an option for the teacher to then say, well, I'm not going to worry about her. She's always causing trouble, XYZ. No. That child is in your room. And if the two of you are not meeting face to face and on the same page, nobody is going to suffer more than the child that's in the middle of that relationship. And if we're in the business of educating children, and if we're in the business as parents of advocating and making sure that our kids get what they need, then we have got to be open to repairing and to avoiding damage when it comes to relationships between one another.
Right. And that's actually a perfect segue into the next section that we talked about, which is identifying when another partner needs to enter into this relationship to assist and support. And sometimes, in those tense moments, sometimes you do need a third party to come in and help both parties come together. So, talk to us a little bit about that, identifying additional support and bringing them in.
Yeah, and it's important. Timing is the most important piece of this, adding a third party. Timing, because sometimes we can wait until it's almost beyond repair. And I'm not talking about just miscommunication. I'm talking about, when is it time to involve the team that will come in and test to see whether or not my child has a learning disability. Do I wait until he just fails and fails and fails and fails? Or do I bring him in early? When is it time for me to bring him to the doctor to see if he can, to find out if he can see? Vision appointments, doctor's appointments. So those are those third parties that are still vital to the whole piece, the whole puzzle, right? So timing is critical, bringing others in when it is time. So that's the RTI process, RTI, response to instruction, as far as looking potentially at the need of, or looking at the potential of sped services, or making sure that our child is getting the kinds of services. And that's where those 504 plans come in, and accommodations and things of that nature. So bringing that person in when it's time, maybe looking at the school nurse. If there's an issue where my child is having an accident at a certain time of day, every day, then now it's time to possibly include the school nurse who may be on site, who can maybe help us to manage that, right? But not waiting until the child is embarrassed and there seems to be no other solution. So bringing those persons in on time. And as it relates to conflict, then maybe bringing in the school leader, maybe bringing in the lead administrator or the dean or somebody who can be unbiased and come in and see the situation for what it is and help us to make sure that this relationship stays intact. As it relates to conflict or resolution, anything like that. So bringing in those school leaders, bringing in those medical professionals who may have to adjust dosages for medication, just all of those things. It's important to know, all right, this is beyond our area of expertise. So let's discuss who needs to come in and help us to get these moving pieces in order.
Right, right. And to that, I would also add, using the, many community advocates and community-based organizations and advocates that house within those organizations to support you in some of these conversations. It's important that if a parent is identifying this person, like the school is good at identifying additional professionals, especially if you're going through a special education process, anything related to academic and learning, even social emotional learning, schools can do a really great job of either having someone on site or knowing who's in the landscape that could potentially support that situation. But for parents, it's important that whoever they're bringing in, they are comfortable with that person, and that person hears them and sees them and respects them, and that's the kind of people that they should be bringing to the table with them. And that could be someone in your family. It can be your sister.
Absolutely
communicates very well at her child's school, and can navigate these waters. It can be someone from your church. It can be someone from your community who can assist you. So it doesn't just have to be a person with the title.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. So thank you for that. Bringing in other people, please do that. We get calls all the time. And sometimes well, that's not exactly what Open does, but you're a parent and we're not going to turn you away. So however I can assist you. And you know what? Sometimes it's me crafting an email that says what the parent wants to say. And all they have to do is put their name in it. And I'm like, this email is requesting exactly what it is that you want. It's been worded in a way that they can receive it. Here you go. Take my name. I'll put your name in, send it. And sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah. But that also speaks to the fact that the passion that you have for helping families goes far beyond Open.
Yeah.
Right. It goes far beyond the network itself, because at the end of the day, we are individuals, we are humans who, although we have titles, we have a passion for what we do. And if that is helping families, we're going to do whatever we can. I get the same calls. We're a tutoring center. We're a school and a tutoring center. And sometimes parents will call and say, hey, I'm going to be meeting with my child's school tomorrow, and I just don't know what to say. And I'm not sure. Can you give me some advice? Can you talk to me? And we'll sit on the phone and we'll talk to them. We'll walk them through it. Like, this is what you should be asking for. This is what you should look for. These are the questions you need to ask. And then the parent walks away feeling empowered. And no, we haven't done what is in our job description necessarily, but that doesn't matter when your whole goal is to help families.
Right. And our goal as our organization is to drive for equity and justice. And if there is a communication barrier, then the child's not going to have an equitable education experience. So there's a lot that falls underneath that umbrella, and we just have to jump in and support where we can. And it really doesn't require a lot.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process. Like, what's up? You need to say what to whom. All right, I got you. I'm gonna send it to you.
Yeah.
Say this, and you'll be fine. And if there's an issue, call me back. And then
right. It's just that simple. It's just that simple.
So you've given us a lot of great advice and tips and examples that really take us through the year.
Yeah.
School starts, be proactive about that communication piece, set those expectations, set goals, give people the benefit of the doubt, show that you're invested in the relationship and that you value it when you're talking to people. And that goes both ways. Identify additional parties to support you when that is necessary. And so now we're kind of like going towards the end of the school year. This is often what we don't talk about, right? Like, how do we still, invest in this relationship when we are coming to the end of the school year?
Yeah. And so we're talking about that transition period, right? And that transition period is just as important at the end of the year as it is at the beginning. So just like we started off saying, before school starts, this is transition. Before school starts, get to know the culture of the school, get to know the school leaders, get to know who your child's teacher or teachers may be. What is the culture in their classroom? That kind of thing. That's just as important at the end. So now at the end of the year, as we get ready to transition, and whether my child is coming back here, going to a different school, this is now that discussion, that culmination that needs to happen. Did we reach the goals that we set this year? So in our company, we like to do strategy sessions, and we'll, especially at the end of every programming period, so the school year, and we do it in between as well. But at the end of the school year, specifically at the end of the summer, we do it, and we talk about what worked and what didn't work. Just that simple. It's a 10, 15-minute phone call that parent gets on, teacher gets on. Can we talk about what worked? Can we talk about what didn't work? Right? So we set expectations at the beginning. Did we meet expectations? What are some areas that we fell short? And how can we adjust for next year? How can I, as a parent, adjust to make sure that my kid, because we had some rough patches. So what do I need to do at home to make sure over the summer, to make sure that next year we don't run into some of these same issues? Teacher, what can I do, mom? What can I do, dad, to make sure that the kids that come through my room next year are benefited by the experience that we've had together, right? If you're saying it's taking me too long to reach back out to you, then you've got to tell me that. And then I need to make the adjustment moving forward. So that conversation needs to happen socially. Did we reach the goals? What is next year looking like? Is my child going from middle school to high school? And what are some of the things that we can do to manage that transition? Leaving the school he's been at for so many years, she's been at for so many years. What do you suggest, having been with my child for a full year now? What do you suggest I do as I begin to build relationships with this next school, right? And then we're talking about end of the year transitions, but what about those moments when a teacher leaves the classroom in the middle of the year, right? The students show up on Monday and they just left the teacher gave them homework on Friday.
Yeah.
And they show up Monday to turn in that homework, and there's no teacher to be found. Oh, she's not here anymore, right? So that, and some of that a lot of that has to be managed by the school leaders.
Yeah.
And managed properly.
Yes.
Because it's difficult enough for a child to make transition. It's difficult for a child to adjust to changes. So when the changes are abrupt and unexpected, it makes it that much more difficult. So now the parent has been blindsided.
Yeah.
The child has been blindsided, and we, the school leaders, continue, unfortunately, in many cases, to carry on as if it's just business as usual, but it's not. Right. So even when we have those moments where it's tough to manage throughout the school year, where we're having to make transitions, a teacher leaving, or a child being moved to a different classroom, or a new school leader coming in, right? So it's important to ask questions.
Yeah.
If you're in that school, and when I say in the school, I just mean engaged. I don't mean that you don't have a job to go through to from 9 to 5. But if you are in that school in the sense of engaged, and you know the tenor, you know the pulse of the school, and you're listening to your child talk to his friend, and something piques your interest, and he's talking about such and such left, or this teacher said he might be leaving, or she might, you need to listen and start asking questions. Start asking your child. That's when I said earlier that listening to your child is critical, right? Because they'll tell you some things that will cause you to jump into action. Wait, hold up, so-and-so left? What do you mean? Right? So start asking those questions of the school leaders and requiring that those questions be answered. Making sure that I've got to be the advocate for my child, and I've got to be able to manage any transitions that are potentially coming up. So asking those questions, and then staying with the ship as much as is humanly possible. Don't just yank your child when transition needs to happen, because sometimes we jump the gun, right? Because the reality is sometimes a teacher needs to move. Sometimes a teacher needs to leave the classroom for whatever reason, and that could be a good thing for your child. So not jumping the gun, but asking questions that are necessary, and then staying on long enough to see that transition through, as long as it does not cause detriment to your child.
Right. That was wonderful. Thank you very much. And the last, part is so important, particularly for the public school landscape that we are operating in New Orleans, where transition and changes happen a lot.
A lot. Yeah.
Teachers will leave or be asked to leave in the middle of the year. That is the nature of the work, as the nature of how the system has been set up.
Yeah, absolutely.
I always say that at-will contracts are a double-edged sword. They cut both ways.
Yes.
And so sometimes it's like, a teacher's had enough, right? They're not getting the support that they need.
Oh, yeah.
They don't have communication with their leadership, so they're leaving. And that could be a good thing for them. Sometimes, leadership has to make a decision in the moment for what's for the kids in the classroom, but it's still a major transition.
It is.
And what you said is accurate. Like, I've heard of situations where, kids came back on Monday and their principal was different. Like,
that's a big deal.
And, I'm not sure if there were whole school community conversations, individual classroom conversations, giving students an opportunity to voice their concerns with not just the transition itself, but how it happened. Not always fully treating, children as full feeling humans that are, fully in their experience and are taking all of this in. Children also overhear the conversations of grown folk, right? There's always a child in the teacher's lounge, like, why are you in the teacher's lounge?
I'm getting a Coke for Miss So-and-so.
Right. And you heard what I just said, which was for your 5th grade years. And then that can go back to the home. Same ways that in a school you hear about things that are going on in the home that the parent didn't tell you, but
it should stand out, and it should cause you to carefully begin to inquire, cause you to carefully begin to hold that person accountable. Hey, I didn't realize that so-and-so maybe wasn't sleeping home anymore. This is something that I need to know. You don't have to tell me all your business, but I need to know if there's a transition this heavy, right, that is going to affect how my student, your child, functions in class. These are the kinds of things that I need to know to manage the transition.
Right. So thank you for that. And to add, I mean, you kind of touched on it before, but just don't make, even from the point of view of the parent, try not to make abrupt changes, try to help folks transition and maintain that relationship all the way to the end. So for example, this is often what happens. The parent has already decided that you're not going back to that school, right? They decided during the 1-app process in February that you were not going back to that school. They got their new school announcement, when did they get it? Like in April or something like that. So they know you're not coming back. So they're done with Mrs. So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so, Dean So-and-so, but there's 3 more months left in the school year, right? So you can't check out then, when you decided that you're done, but you can't be done, right? That also happens in a marriage sometimes. I decided that I'm done, but we have kids. So
we have to manage this transition.
So we have to manage this transition. Just encouraging parents to take your advice and see it all the way through and have that conversation at the end. Like, I think we're pretty well aware of some of the things that didn't go well. But, let's have this final conversation so I can bring some valuable information to my child's next setting.
And think about, I'm sorry.
No, please.
Think about how that will build character in your child. That this is not the perfect situation. And trust me, I am not advocating subjecting your child to any sort of abusive situation, anything like that. But I'm talking about something that may just be a little bit uncomfortable. It's something that is not the perfect situation. Think of how that develops character in a child, that we are going to see this through to the end. You are still going to finish strong. You are still going to do your best. You're turning in your homework. You're showing up on time. You are all of those things that we've expected of you. This is how you're going to finish, even though you're not coming back to this school next year. Because at the end of the day, it is not about the school. It is about the child that I'm raising. And what am I teaching my child if I allow my child to pull back when things become uncomfortable? Or when things are less than ideal? That does not change you or your character. So at the end of the day, we've got to finish strong.
Great. I love it. Well, Arianne, we are at the end of our time. This was a wonderful discussion. Please let people know where they can find you to work with you, get your book, and so that they continue to use you and your expertise as a resource.
Yeah, sure thing. So, and I do, once again, I want to thank you so much, Nahliah, for this conversation. And I do hope that something that was said pierces and maybe turns on the light for a parent, a school leader, a teacher, staff, just everybody who's involved in this collective, this community, because we've got a long way to go. Right? And we've got a lot of work to do. So hopefully this helped to turn on the light for somebody. But if you want to reach me, there are 2 different ways. You can check out our school's website. We tutoring and our private school, hypeacademy.com, HYPE, helping young people excel. But also, if you want to get my book, Teach Your Own Kid, Schools Can't Do It Alone, can be found at teachyourown.kid.com.
All right. Thank you very much, Arianne. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
To everyone who's listening, thank you for joining us. You'll have continued access to this webinar to come back and refer to some of the advice that was given. This is all in an effort to support families and educators in creating the best educational experiences for our children. And so in the spirit of that, again, I'd like to thank you. Check out Open, check out Teach Your Own Kid and Hype Academy for additional resources and ways to make sure that your child is successful in school. So we're going to sign out. I'd like to thank all of you again, and till next time, thank you.